So, by way of introduction, my name is Stuart Bell. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director here at GroupBC, and joining us very shortly is Stephen Crompton, the Chief Technology Officer. Just so that we've got a couple of acting roles for today, I'm taking the role of antagonist and kicking off and starting this morning's presentation, and Steve is our champion or protagonist. So GroupBC, we've been supporting So GroupBC have been supporting 20 years of digital transformation, and I guess from our perspective, we've been helping companies be more organised in the way that they manage information, taking them from this place of anarchy and chaos, and that line might represent the door to their business, and we're trying to present one common source of truth of trusted project and asset information, in order that when that's captured and computed, it can be easily communicated both internally within the organisation and out to the wider project team, and indeed clients as well. We work with construction companies, so contractors, consultants, but also with a variety of asset-owning clients, and I think it's given us quite a unique perspective in terms of the very broad information requirements of the industry. And just to share with you some of the organisations that we work with, you can see there's varying clients here that both work in the UK and internationally, and clients of different scale as well. So whether it's from small project teams, joint ventures, all the way up to large-scale enterprise deployments where our technology is deployed across the broad programs and projects that these client organisations run. So I wanted to start really with a bit of a health check report, and I think if you stood in April 2016, fresh with the mandate of BIM Level 2 from the government, and looked out into the horizon, you may have been led to believe that we were heading to a place of the promised land, and with one wave of the magical BIM wand, we would all march joyfully forward into the future. And in fact, as a recent update, MBS produced a national BIM report. It's actually showing some healthy signs. So over 60% of the industry now using BIM, and 95% expect to within 3 years. But a bit of buyer beware here. Only 45% of project teams say they use a model from inception to completion of a project. So it's evident when we actually look at true adoption that there's a little bit more work that we need to do. I then turned to a paper from the University of Oxford, PropTech, the future of real estate, and historically you might think the property industry has been quite traditional or stayed in its approach, but this paper highlights really that technology has been a positive disruptor, and sensors, big data techniques, predictive analytics, business intelligence reporting are really starting to be embraced, and there's some significant investments going in. One thing that may have held that back, though, are people, ourselves, our colleagues, the people that we work with day to day. And The Economist wrote an interesting article talking about why we need to constantly educate and inform and address the question of what's in it for me as an individual, and ensure people understand what we're trying to get them to do in the workplace, and with the enabling technology we're giving them, making sure that they stay abreast and apace of those. So the challenge we've really got is one of communication and how we converse with one another. And we have a mantra here at BC of starting with the end in mind. What is it that the clients are trying to achieve, whether that's procuring a building or whether that's implementing some technology. And simplistically, in terms of that information flow across the construction supply chain, over on the left-hand side, we've got an employer with a requirement. And he's passing that requirement, in this example, down to a main contractor, who then needs to communicate that down to the supply chain. And then we're receiving information back. I guess each of us, in that sense, are information managers looking to process, validate, and then communicate at different junctures or stages in the project. And PCSG put together an interesting slide here that just shows an evolution or a simplification, if you like, of the BIM wedge that identifies that across project life stages, as as we progress, the wealth of project information grows, but at the same time, a healthy byproduct of that should be the capture of asset information as well. It shouldn't be that at the end of the project we're scurrying around pulling together digital O&M information as an afterthought. That should be a process of aggregation as we progress through our operation. And indeed, that may repeat over time. So if we're doing repeat work for a client and it may be on an existing asset portfolio, we would see a repeat of that, and each time that we're running projects, it would populate into the asset information model on the right-hand side. And the sorts of information that we're capturing. So in blue would typically be the information on a project, and in green the information that is prepared for handover. Now there are some new information types that have been introduced as a result of building information modelling. So just up in the top right-hand corner, EIRs, BEPs, MIDIPs have appeared, but largely the types of information that we're capturing and controlling are the same. And figuratively speaking, when you look at the corpus or all of the files and information and data that sit around a project, we could look at it as an iceberg, where above the waterline are the stuff that we're measured and rewarded against. They're the formal information deliverables, so they tend to get a lot of focus from us in terms of how we control. But below the waterline is all the production documentation, all of the emails and correspondence, all the work in progress files as well. And it's perhaps operationally, it's that may slow us down. It's that might cause us some challenges if it's not properly controlled. So it's really important that at the waterline, that focus on technical service delivery, we need to ensure that we're looking at project information management in totality. And that journey of how do we start eating the elephant, how do we start progressing on our process of digital transformation can be quite challenging. And rather than a straight path into the future, as we started this segue, perhaps it's more of a winding road. And if we've got a strategy for achieving a level of compliance, for instance, perhaps that's sitting out there in 2020, we might want to break that down into operational plans and measurable sprints on a 12-monthly basis. So the industry has sped up significantly, and over the 25 years that I've worked, I've seen a radical shift from paper to documents to data. And on the whole, technology has been a significant enabler and has sped up a number of processes. But one of the challenges of technology is the immediacy of communication and how easy it is to respond, how much thinking time might be taken out because of the immediacy of that reply. And so perhaps what we ought to be thinking about is how do we put some governance and control in that process, rather than just allowing anyone on the project to do a reply all and send back an instruction to the client without having perhaps considered the full ramifications. The average cost of an invoicing query, over £50, and yet still we see an awful lot of paper being passed around, maybe from the finance team and out to site. I've met somebody recently who still prints all of their email, believe it or not, and that's probably a day's email in the background on the shelves there on a particular project. But this image here is representative not only of email, but perhaps of the daily deluge of email that hits our inboxes as well. And it's no wonder that at a personal productivity level, we're challenged with trying to see the wood for the trees and be successful in the way that we work day to day. And at the same time, rather shocking image, systems that we're utilising, many of those were designed for yesteryear. Many of those weren't designed to cope with the volume of information that we're now receiving, be they point cloud or GIS data or even large model files. And so what's happened is it's introduced a lot of informality in terms of information exchange, and many individuals have raced off to Dropbox just to expedite a project and to get the job done without thinking of the ramifications. Several years ago on Christmas lists, many of the board of directors in our companies received iPads, and immediately the Monday following Christmas they came into the workplace with a thirst for information at any time and everywhere, because this very tactile technology which is now translated down to smartphones as well, means that we want to be forever connected to the workplace and our projects, and ensure that we're keeping abreast. So there's been some positive disruption in that regard as well. And then we turn to information management and filing, and I don't know if this is representative of anybody online, but we still see the anarchy and chaos of network shares, individuals on projects left to their own devices, inheriting the quality standards, but then right-clicking to create an infinite level of folders beneath that. And no wonder when at e-discovery you're looking for a certain piece of information, you may struggle to find that. And some of the challenges came into the industry with the advent of Microsoft Office and the introduction of applications like Excel. They immediately gave commercial teams a capability to manage their project bank accounts and their monthly cost value reconciliations, amongst other things. And then more recently, or in the last decade, we've seen email take over as the dominant form of communication, and as I mentioned a moment ago, Dropbox making its appearance as well. And each of those, you can imagine, if you removed one of those from industry, construction may stall slightly whilst we scurry around thinking about how do we continue to operate. We're an industry that's highly regulated, an industry that, whether we're talking a level 2 mandate, so we've taken basic information management, we've turned up the volume control around the protocol of file naming, information exchange and approval, all the way through to handover and beyond, or whether more currently we're talking GDPR and what, as organisations, we're doing to ready ourselves and prepare not only for ourselves internally, but perhaps for our clients' data or our supply chain data that we may be managing as well. So a number of things that we need to think about, and this made me smile when I saw Stella Rimington, former Director General of MI5, reflecting on the challenge of working with construction. I don't know that is a fair comment. I'll let you decide. But whilst we're thinking of MI5, let's think about cyber attack and data breach. And there have been many instances publicly in the news. I think one of the largest, going back a couple of years, was the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. 11.5 million documents were taken, and it led to the demise of quite a number of people in government around the world. But it's thinking more close to home. There was an example in China where a whole building was pirated, and the potential of a USB drive, somebody going into an office loading the models from an original Zaha Hadid design, passing those to a further developer, and uncannily that second developer able to get their project out of the ground ahead of the original. And now we're in this world of trying to interpret requirements. So when we're asking questions, are we clear in what we're asking, and in order that we're answering the right question in the first place? Because if we're not, the challenge of project handover can be difficult. And is it acceptable now that we have archive containers in our car parks holding the legacy of the 12 years of information retention that we're dutifully obliged to hold? Perhaps there is an alternate way. And we're starting to see new challenges as well around the strategy of location. And when you take an asset or a project and you put it in its place in the physical world, there's so much more that we might now want to understand about that project, whether it's at early stage design and planning, and we want to look at that project in the context of sites of scientific interest, for instance, or listed buildings in the area. Technology will now enable us to stream all of that information together. So there are many drivers for the need to embrace and invest and implement a common data environment, but more pertinently, this movement towards better information management is key. And when we're engaged in the market, there's quite a number of project drivers arise in our discussions with prospective clients of things that they're looking to achieve, and things that the implementation of a robust information management strategy can support as well. So there's no doubt that being in the race is really, really important. So stood eagerly now, like Usain Bolt at the start line, is my colleague Stephen Crompton, who will pick up the question why CDEs matter.
Thank you, Stuart. So we'll start really with reiterating some of that, and fundamentally what we're all focused on here inevitably are very, very common, simple things around delivery, around making sure that we're able to deliver our projects to time, to budget, meeting the expectations of the client, ultimately delivering the asset that meets the need as far as the ongoing capability of that asset and operations and so on are concerned. And ultimately we're measured on the quality of what it is we deliver, but also very much driven by this brave new world of digital, and indeed the mandates that's described. We have not just the delivery of the project and the physical asset, but also this increasing need to focus on the delivery of a digital twin. And in fact, this slide here is a real example from one of our clients. Some of you may know it. It's actually a BRE a research project called the E4 House. On the left-hand side there, sitting in BRE, we have this templated model house, which is the actual physical asset, but delivered in parallel with that is an exact digital replication of that. And why that's important, of course, is that actually that allows, in a very real sense, the eventual owners of that asset not just to be given keys to the physical building, but of course to the digital building, and indeed not in fact only upon point of handover, but before then, and being able to make decisions about the products that are within there, about the paint colours on the wall, understanding all of the information that's within there. Now, ultimately, why do we capture all this information? Why are we so focused on that? Everything in this is about how we can use information to make decisions more quickly. And we've all been in this situation whereby we've had a problem with a domestic appliance, and a future indeed is not too far away, and certainly if we all get behind this, where it will be absolutely commonplace when those appliances go wrong to have at our fingertips access to all of the information that will allow us to get from that problem of I can't do my washing to ultimately having an engineer come and looking at that in a couple of days' time. But it is a challenge. It's an information challenge, and it's one which, as Stuart says, starts with the end in mind, but what we're trying to deliver here, as well as all that project information and so on, is a collection of information that's formed thus. So it's a combination of spatial information, documents, and of course data. But I think more important are those words on the right-hand side, because ultimately, if I'm going to be using information to make decisions, whether it's during a project or whether it's during operation of an asset, then I need to know that that information is something I can trust. I need to be able to rely on the provenance of that. And of course, it also needs to be up to date. And even if it ticks both of those boxes, by definition, it needs to be something that I'm actually able to use. And indeed, not just me, but the systems that interface with that. So this digital twin is a very deliberate name, because real twins grow old, and we aren't just focused on delivering these assets and then forgetting about it. We need to deliver something that then has a life of itself and continues to flourish and change, and as and when that physical entity changes, so indeed does the digital entity. If we focus, therefore, back to the challenges that we are all very, very aware of, that either will mean we succeed or not in both the delivery of the project and the digital twin, then these will be recognised by all. But I'm going to highlight very much on communication, and indeed picking up from within the industry itself, very long-term companies within there, focusing really around delivery failure and communication being at the heart of that. Ultimately, it sounds basic, it is basic, but if I'm not accessing the right information at the right time, if it takes me a long time to get to that information, particularly when we have churn with starters and leavers and so on, then it's not going to be an efficient process. So it's absolutely vital that we get that information in order. And that's reiterated by regular surveys. Here's one indeed, the annual report by KPMG, a specific document of theirs, looking at project failure and how fundamentally projects will succeed or not based on being able to have the flow of information between all of those supply chain parties, and it very much is the make or break between success or, as it says there, catastrophic failure. Now, where therefore does this common data environment come into it? And it's obviously a phrase many of us know, some of us understand very well, but even so has multiple ways of being described. At its simplest, hugely positive and useful resource of information, the B1M. Put simply, it's an online place for collecting, managing and sharing information within project teams. I think the online is so important because ultimately it's about everyone engaged in the process being able to have universal access to information. More precisely, again, an excellent source of information, the Designing Buildings Wiki. It is very specifically about those things we've mentioned. Yes, it's about sharing information, but it's about control. It's about collecting graphical, non-graphical, and documentary information for the entire project team. And fundamentally coming back to this whole waste that we get from having to duplicate information or go back because we've made mistakes. If information is current and easily usable, then that will allow us to deliver those successes. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we have a single environment, as is provided here in great evidence by PCSG again. In fact, what we really have is a connected flow of information. Yes, as Stuart says, we've got a deliverable which is being delivered into that client organization, and that client indeed then needs to keep that information up to date. But of course, we need to maintain not just the records within the project and the connected project teams within that project information model, but also indeed our own information. And in fact, it's far, far easier to be part of that whole process, really, if we do begin that information management journey, as it says there, at home. And following on from that slide, I think this is summed up very well, which is that really information management, starting with the simple things such as codification, proper version control, suitability, making sure that information is only used for the reasons that it should be used, so that we're not using information that is only suitable for information. We're not using that, for example, to move into construction. That clear, unambiguous tagging is absolutely vital throughout the process. So therefore, why a common data environment? And obviously for the purposes of this, why also would I suggest our common data environment? Well, fundamentally, common data environments are about being able to provide the capability for managing all of this information in its various forms, but also for then being able to, as a result of that, connect that to our other systems and processes. And coming very specifically onto BC, we have been on this journey for a long, long time, as Stuart says. I mean, I first became involved in collaboration within construction over 20 years ago. I've worked very closely with clients as they've progressed through this journey and helping to deliver this structured information. So where do we find ourselves as far as our needs within the modern world? Well, first and foremost, that common data environment, it has to be mobile. As we say, at the moment that iPads became available, there was the expected need to be able to have this information wherever we are. So these days, if you're not able to have access to the current information records, be able to carry out communications within there and so on from wherever you are, whatever device you're using, then really that's going to be a challenge as far as meeting those information needs. But the other thing, I mentioned starters and leavers here, is it's got to be about having that consistent information record, not just of one project, but actually of everything that we are doing and we have done. In fact, if we go back to the mandate, and really if we go back to some of the ideas around standards, which are really just a way of bringing together those things we've already been doing. What we're trying to do here is deliver consistency. We're trying to be able to get in a place where we can learn from what we've done before, reuse that information and do things better each time, which is why having an environment that brings all of that together, starting with the end in mind, as you can see in the top left there, not just focusing on single project delivery, but actually focusing on that collection of assets that we've ever delivered into, and indeed where those assets are and the ongoing progression of those, whether I'm a client or whether I'm delivering to the client. Those become fundamental these days. And if we have that information record, then of course that brings great power when it comes to being able to search and indeed very, very rapidly find, for example, all of the latest construction record across assets of a given type, as we can see there in the bottom left. And adoption, really the slide about people, I think is so important because if you haven't got a system which is that Dropbox friendly, which is able to be used where people are, then ultimately they will go to those systems that do allow them that. So it is absolutely one of our drivers to make sure that we learn from the advancements within the simple interfaces of Dropbox and other such tools, and present that so that this doesn't look like what people would typically think of as enterprise software, but actually just feels appealing to use, and therefore just drives that adoption. But the topic we're talking about here is about monitoring performance. Ultimately, we capture information so that we can do that. We capture structured information so that we can do that. We can only monitor our performance if we have the data to be able to do that. But then if we have that, we can drive that up through dashboards, as we can see here, not just at looking at how I'm doing, but actually how my company's doing as a whole, and indeed how projects are doing. And at an individual level, I can use the powerful tools within strong information management systems to not only drive what I have to do when I am within that common data environment, but also even when I'm using tools outside of it. So email is here to stay. I don't think we'll get rid of email for a long time, but we for a long time have seen how we can embrace that rather than have people resort to sending things via email, pull people into the system via email and straight to that information to get on with their work. And having that consistent, structured and ultimately searchable information record rather than that mess that Stuart showed on his computer is so important, particularly when you might be able to understand that if it's your computer, but when you're within a shared environment or someone new is coming to it, having those processes, having those common structures is absolutely vital. And the system must reflect the way you actually work. So we have real subtleties within our industry to do with how we manage information. We don't, in fact, just manage documents such as drawings or indeed electronic paper as a standalone. Sometimes these are combined together, and this is where things such as renditions, which really you get through common data environments, are what are needed. When it comes to that compliance with standards, it is a challenge. It's a challenge not just with level 2, but in fact mandating your own ways of working throughout an organization. But we have tools available to us to make that incredibly simple. So we can make it so that people are able to be able to code information without having to really know and understand and learn exactly how to do that. We can drive that through the process of the CDE. And similarly, we can make sure that rather than emails go back and forth, we can have contractual and non-contractual communications done from within a common data environment. But the only way we're going to drag people away from email is if we make it so that those communications are in a way that reflect what people are already used to. So something that indeed looks exactly like email. And in an instant allows people to do things such as review, comment, and even electronically mark up. And ultimately, as well as having an information record to be able to search and find and get access to information quickly, let's not forget that, we know that we're delivering projects. We know that sometimes the outcome of projects years later is that something goes wrong and that we need to be able to evidence what that is. And being able to have a record of activity, not that's held by someone else, but actually is a record that you have and are able to evidence yourself. Fundamentally, that's what a common data is able to deliver. And it must, of course, not sit completely standalone. It has to integrate with our working processes and ultimately with the real world. Now, once we have such a platform, we're in a far easier position to be able to drive those things such as governance. And if we look at a quick example here, which is about a real challenge, which is how, when you've got hundreds of projects, do you make sure that you can get the same consistent delivery from people within the supply chain who are coming and going from that, and you want to be able to make that as efficient as possible, but still require that everything is audited, everything is correctly tagged, easy search and retrievable. That is where really technology can come to help us here, because we can use technology to define up front how we want to deliver that work, how we want to deliver the expected schedules and milestones of that, and ultimately how we're going to communicate that to the supply chain and guide them through so that we can monitor that information. And in fact, we have an example here. I can, without any understanding, I know I'm the commercial manager, I can highlight what it is I have to do, and I can see that actually the business plan has not yet been provided. So if we go into where that would normally be provided within the common data environment, then that business plan is there in that standard documentation. But we have the ability, because we know we have a consistent way of being able to give all of the guidance and evidence to someone so that it meets those standards, so that they deliver the information to their information requirements right first time. So I can in fact provide the templates to those individuals. So I'm not just saying I want some information from you, I'm actually saying this is how I want it, and I'm giving you all the tools that you need to be able to do that. So I can very quickly go through without then having to worry about opening the tools in order to carry that work. It just guides me through a process. Now, this process can't speed up Word. But here is the document that we have immediately downloaded. Here is the template of that document. And an example, and what I'm going to do is just kickstart that off by entering in my own information in there, giving it a title, because this is to do with a fictitious Waterloo Bridge project. And when I save that information in fact goes directly into that CDE in the right place. I'm not having to be walked through a series of training to understand what I'm doing. It's able to capture that structured information record, but in a way which is absolutely simple to use. So if we just follow this through to its natural conclusion, I've uploaded that information, and it in fact knows that that is to do with that project, any metadata and so on. That's predefined for me. So I'm not even having to think about how that information should be tagged. I know as that recipient of information what it is that I'm expecting from you, and there it is. That's been delivered through the system. So I have used that common data environment without even realizing I've used that common data environment. Now, we've talked so far about documentation, but of course that digital twin is formed up not just of documents, but also of spatial information, specifically of model information. And what we need to be able to do in order to have that building up of that digital twin is drive that through to our supply chain. So this is about giving universal access through a web browser to everyone. So here is the federated model that I can search, I can find information, and I can very, very easily contribute the information that I've uploaded, be it, for example, the warranty information or the specifications, through into the CDE, so that when in operations that can be easily retrieved. But not only that, before I even upload information, I can in fact use tools that were previously unavailable to me to check that is not clashing with information, and making sure that I deliver from what is the common standard set of libraries and of objects that have currently been approved by the client. Now, as far as the future is concerned, have we really delivered digital twins by doing all this? Well, there are still lots of questions that we can't necessarily ask, and so really this is just about being able to create an information model that can then be linked in to other data. And this isn't just future, this is something that's happening now. Back to Thames, who obviously, as I say, are delivering many, many hundreds of projects at this time. And delivering projects is all about risks, and there are lots and lots of project risks out there which are not necessarily captured immediately within that CDE. But the data is out there, as they say, the world is out there. But what we need is we need a way of being able to bring that information together into that common interface. And indeed, this is what you're able to do within a CDE. So at the simplest level, we've got the ability to see all of the assets and indeed the projects leading into those assets, be them wastewater or natural water or infrastructure and so on. But we can do better than that. We can actually start to bring in associated information, and this is in fact a live system. I can start to bring in information about woodland, I can start to bring in information to do with battlefields, to do with flood data, to do with myriad data sets that are going to help me have an information model available to me that's going to allow me just to do things more quickly with reduced risk, and ultimately what it is we're trying to do, which is driving that project performance continually. So I think that's where I'd like to stop. Obviously there was a lot to get through there, but hopefully that's been useful to our audience.
As we thank you, Steve. Thank you very much indeed. As we close in on the final few minutes, it's evident that for many people we sit comfortably with what we know, and the straw that breaks the camel's back may often be a claim and a process that then hits the boardroom, and demands then get and pressures get pushed down into the business, and we're challenged with rectifying those mistakes and not addressing them again. And KPMG last year, I thought it was an interesting quote from a paper that they wrote: architects, engineering, construction companies and project owners who invest in disruptive technologies should enjoy a step change in performance. And I think if we can combine that with right at the start, that commentary from the article in The Economist that talks about the continual education of our people, we're probably a good way to heading there. So Bill Price, Systems and Technology Director at Costain, having a system that supports best practice has allowed us to deliver improvements in the success and profitability of projects. And one of the things I'll come on to momentarily is this idea of actually how do we start eating the elephant, and how do we successfully land technology into our project environments, project teams, not only our internal people, but how do we combine and engage our external collaboration partners in our supply chain, and indeed our clients as well. So even on very large scale and complex organisations like Thames Water, it was important to them that we were able to deliver alongside their asset maintenance program procurement cycles a solution in quite tight timelines as well. And it's clients that will probably drive all of us into the future. And Michael Barber, Systems Development Manager at Sainsbury's, we want to understand what's in our estate, but also what's in our future. And it's been very important for Sainsbury's, with a very diverse and geographically dispersed asset portfolio, that information that they receive from their supply chain when they're procuring either new projects or remodels or refurbishments of existing stores and petrol stations, and more recently Argos and Habitat concessions as well, that all of that information is delivered in a format that they can recycle the knowledge from. It's easily queryable, and it supports people across the estates team to actually optimise that estate. And so Steve's talked about BC. It would be remiss of us to run a session on common data environments without championing our own. And so BC is a platform that's indeed modular, supporting right at the heart the management of data, documents, and spatial information, including now all that streamed in GIS data. So that's been important for us. But we also sit right across that project and asset life cycle. So early stage projects, we can get involved in supporting those bid management, both pre and post contract. Steve showed a little insight to our capability of managing programs of work as well, and ensuring that our supply chains are readily supported. And I think in this age where our supply chains are perhaps our brand ambassadors, they're the people who are doing our work on the ground, the more that we can assist them in supporting them on this information management journey, it's more likely that they'll want to retain their loyalty to us as well. Obviously, right at the heart of this, building information modelling and management, and ensuring that not only can we view model information, but more pertinently and importantly, we can actually get into the underlying data, and we can support at successive stages in the project information so that it's ready for ultimately for handover, whether that's from supply chain to main contractor, or main contractor to consultant or client. The geo capability, so that's relatively unique in that rather than have to license expensive GIS software, or rather than GIS data be locked down into those proprietary applications, we're able to socialise and democratise that data and make it available to people that are in the broader project team. So the geo capability we're starting to see is becoming increasingly important in this next generation common data environment that we head toward. And for certain of our clients, actually monitoring and measuring capital project delivery and property performance is important. So having enriched databases to manage that level of asset has been important. Now that could seem quite extensive, and you may be sat there with or without this type of technology wondering how do you start. And I think that from our perspective, we've spent nearly 20 years working with an array of organisations right across the project and asset life cycle that have been faced with that same quandary. How do I eat the elephant? Well, for us, it's really looking at ensuring you've got a defined scope, you've got measured objectives, you're breaking down this very large project into measurable sprints with clear date parameters. They're well resourced. Importantly, they're well sponsored from the executive of your business. Your businesses, and they're steered strongly. But it's not just a project that we buy a piece of technology, we plug it in and leave it. It could be we fast track in a matter of weeks. We do this regularly for our clients that have rapid project mobilisation needs. But we also work with clients in the long term that persist with their project steering groups that are involved with business improvement, and they're absorbing the needs not only of their clients but their supply chains, and then they're ensuring that this extensible technology, this flexible platform CDE, then continues to meet their requirements. We do welcome your feedback on today's webinar, and at the end of the session, you will receive a summary email. Each year we try to refresh the content and give a different perspective. We try to both educate and entertain in our approach, and hopefully give you some insights and takeaways that will allow you to take this discussion back into your business, and start to engage like-minded individuals that might want to drive positive change to impact just better welfare day to day, but also bottom line improvements as well. Some people don't like the look of us, so they like joining webinars and online demonstrations, but genuinely we do like to get face to face and engage. That's mostly to come and listen, and to view your current challenges, and look at your aspirations and ambitions, take stock of where you are culturally as well, and how we can take a more measured approach rather than drive some technology into a business that might not be quite prepared for that. And that's part of an ongoing dialogue. So please do request either an online or an on-site workshop with us. We'd also love you to attend further webinars and seminar events that we're running. We're very fortunate. In fact, today, one of our clients is hosting a talk for a number of prospective clients. At a high level, that's industry knowledge share, but more pertinently, it's really helping some prospective clients with the final stage of their business case to get the endorsement and the good feel that implementing this level of change is achievable. If you're in Ireland, do come and see us next week in Dublin. If you prefer to hop on a plane to the Netherlands, Steve is talking at Geodesign and BIM, an event there, and that kind of wraps up our events for 2017. But we're avidly planning now for 2018. We've got time for just a couple of questions. I think some have come in already. So if you'd like to ask any more, please do so by the question area at the bottom of the webinar link. So I've got a couple of questions here in view. I'm going to direct this one at Steve, and I'm going to challenge Steve 20 seconds or less. Is BIM here to stay?
Yes. I think we already know the digital is here to stay. We touch on it every single day. BIM ultimately is around information management. It's around the improvements that we get from having better information management. And if we are to be able to tackle the challenges of the delivery and the growth of assets that we need to do over the forthcoming years, we have to be able to have those efficiencies. There are so many reports that tell us that. And yes, absolutely, good information management is going to be key to making that happen.
Okay, there's two kind of related ones here, I guess related to governance and information security. Where are your servers hosted?
So that's an interesting question. Our servers, and we're very proud of this, we are hosted in the UK, so we are hosted at a Next Generation Data Centre, but we are also backed up in the UK. Indeed, both organisations, ourselves and our hosting provider, are also ISO 27001, and I think these, particularly with this focus on security and indeed on 1192.5 as far as the standards are concerned, those are really absolute fundamentals. And it's not just, in fact, about the hosting provider, about where it's backed up, the organisation. It's actually about being a UK organisation, which indeed we're a UK organisation. We're serving a great number of public and private UK clients, and we absolutely take pride in having our information in absolutely the best place as far as its hosting is concerned.
Some clients won't allow cloud public access. Do you have the facility to deploy on-premise as well?
We do. In that what we provide to our clients, particularly to our Enterprise Plus clients, I would say, is an instance, is a dedicated instance. So back to security, this is not a combined single one-size-fits-all. This is very much a system for the organisation, much as any of its other systems. I would caveat that I would recommend that if wherever possible it is something that we are able to host, because when it comes to ensuring the service levels that are able to be provided around that, making sure that of course we can take advantage of all of the facilities that have been dedicated to delivering this, it's unlikely that such a capability is going to be available on premise. So wherever possible, we would work to provide access with us hosting it, but still look to engage with you to address any security concerns around that, which I am quite sure we would manage.
Two final ones to wrap up the session. What file type does the online viewer allow you to view?
So our online viewer, and I think if we were asking questions about futures and what are going to be drivers, ultimately it views IFC, which is OpenBIM. When it comes to the 3D world, when it comes to the 2D world, our online viewer actually supports up to 300 file formats. Typically, people, of course, use it for the standard productivity, office files, PDF, but also engineering formats, and that's important because not everyone has access to AutoCAD or MicroStation and so on, and being able to load those and comment on those without having access, and indeed without having to install anything, which is what we're able to do these days, is important. I think when it comes to model information, which clearly as we look to the future we go beyond, OpenBIM, the standards around IFC, which will be familiar to many, they absolutely are something we have to all get around and embrace. Our viewer actually is not an IFC viewer. Our viewer is a geometry viewer, and ultimately we could engineer a capability to support multiple file formats. We choose, however, to try and work with industries to drive that standardization wherever possible around OpenBIM, particularly when it comes to having a handover that is going to be maintained for potentially decades. It's important, I think, that is as unproprietary as possible.
Okay, this could be a challenging one, but with your futurology hat on, and it's the final question, what do you forecast will be the next big thing to impact the industry and our approach to collaborative working?
Well, one could argue that the mandate for BIM was driven largely by a financial crisis, but I would hope that we don't have to wait for a crisis as far as the next. And clearly there are a lot of things out there. Everyone will be aware of the likes of Apple recently promoting augmented reality, and I think actually that idea of bringing the outside world and the virtual world together so that real current information can be viewed is going to be a very important thing. But we mustn't lose sight of, augmented reality is already out there, virtual reality is already out there, but what we're trying here is to industrialize what we do. I think what will be a real game changer is if we actually do manage to get behind working to standards, so that we're not just looking at the performance of a single project, but actually we're looking at everything we have nationally and being able to answer questions about that national portfolio, so that when we have, and I hope we don't, but if we have situations such as we've seen recently with regard to our assets and such as Grenfell, we can very quickly answer questions saying, well, where else might that particular, for example, cladding be installed? If we haven't got a record of information because we haven't been working to standards, that becomes harder.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's time to wrap up. We will get back to you individually. We haven't had time, unfortunately, to get through the remaining questions, so we will come back to you individually on those. Really, thank you for joining us this morning, and do keep an eye out on our event pages, and we look forward to engaging with you again soon. Many thanks.